Look, firstly, a little bit about what I'm doing at the moment. I'm the International Director of Regeneration International. We came out of the organic movement. Those of us that formed it, we started this in New York at the climate change meeting in New York in 2014. And we're actually at a seminar in the Rodale headquarters there, and a group of us decided we actually needed to take bigger global action. And out of that, we formed Regeneration International. That was Dr. Vandana Shiva, Dr. Hans Herren, and Ronnie Cummings from the Organic Consumers Association, and others. And I really want to follow on from what Glenn was saying in terms of that what we need to do is regenerate our planet. And we've used the word regeneration because what sustainable means is keeping things at the status quo without further degrading it. That's not good enough. To sustain what we have now is a disaster. We need to restore, rebuild our planet. And when we talk about regeneration, we're talking about at the whole level in terms of landscape, ecology, but also in terms of people, communities. We need to regenerate our social orders, our systems, our democracy, empowering people. And that's how we will get change. And this movement has actually been, for us, incredibly successful. 5 years ago, hardly anyone had heard about regeneration. In part, we also the message we wanted to give out was the whole purpose of farming systems that increase soil organic matter, increase humus, how we can use that to reverse climate change. We're talking about reversing it. We have actually, Glenn, I know the average is 410 parts per million. There's actually, it was this year at Mauna Loa, we got 415 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere for the first time. The last time we went, we were around 400 parts per million, was actually 3.5 million years ago in what's called the late Pliocene warming. And if you want to read the paper in Nature, the temperatures were between 5 to 16 degrees warmer. 5 was the lowest, up to 16. And sea levels were between 20 to 30 meters higher. 2 weeks ago, another paper came out that confirmed these sea level rises. But, what I want to say here is where we are at the moment with 400 parts per million, just going to renewables is not enough because the world will keep on heating. Carbon dioxide takes hundreds of years to get out of the atmosphere. We need to draw it down, and the best place to do it is in the soil through agriculture. And we're actually doing incredibly well in getting that message. Every day in the media, we find something about using regenerative agriculture to reverse climate change. On Monday, in Q&A, there was Julian Cribb talking about it. Yesterday, Al Gore mentioned it, and that's gone all over the world. We're mainstreaming it. So we are having an effect, and I haven't got the time to show you all that because I wasn't actually asked to speak on that. But I just want to say that, for us, regenerative agriculture is really important. And I want people to be aware that it's actually come from us in the organic industry, and we see this regenerative agriculture as a stepping stone for organic. If we went out there and just used the O word, we would not have got the traction. By using the word regeneration, people get it. And we are bringing along all like-minded groups and using it as an umbrella, and that has been incredibly successful. It's gone faster than we imagined in 2014 when we came up with it. All right, what I was asked to talk about really was health and farming safely. And so I want to actually once again follow on what Glenn is talking about. We have at the moment what the World Health Organization calls a global epidemic of non-communicable chronic diseases like cancer, heart disease, diabetes, a whole range of what we would call psychological issues. And we can go on and on and on. And it's the leading cause of mortality and morbidity on the planet. One of the leading causes of poverty. The thing is about these diseases, because they're non-communicatable, you're not going to get cancer sitting next to someone in an airplane. You don't get these diseases because someone's coughed on you. These are due to lifestyle and environmental factors, which means they are preventable by changing our lifestyle and environmental, the negative environmental issues that are causing them. Now, there are many, but what is really substantial, and it's the elephant in the room that you never hear, chemicals, and particularly pesticides. And the science is really clear on that. And that's what I want to talk about, because we hear all the time, oh, there's no need to go organic, a few chemicals are okay. Well, let's look at the science to see, is this true? Limited chemical use, is it okay? So one of the things that we hear all the time is that all these pesticides and chemicals are actually scientifically tested. There's rigorous science. You'll hear it all the time. The whole idea of Roundup being safe or glyphosate being safe. Monsanto will say, we have 840 studies to show they're safe. Actually, they're 840 studies, by the way. No one can see them. They're hidden, and I'll talk more about that. The process of regulating is completely corrupt, and that's the word I use now because it is. But what I'd like to say with pesticides, that all pesticides that are used are formulations. There's one chemical in it called an active ingredient, usually around 1% or less, and then you've got a whole range of other toxic chemicals that are added in that are surfactants or spreaders or synergists to make them work stronger. And Roundup is a classic example. Glyphosate by itself, the active ingredient, if you spray that out on a plant, it hardly works to kill it. They have to mix it with synergists to make it work as an effective as an effective herbicide. So what the assumption here is the regulatory authorities only ask for toxicity testing for the nominated active ingredient, but they do not test the actual formulation that is used. And there's an assumption then that the formulation has the same toxicity as this one active ingredient. That's a scientific nonsense. It's what we call a data-free assumption. But where we have limited scientific testing on these formulated pesticides, they are significantly more toxic. There is some testing of the whole formulation for what is called acute toxicity. That's how much you will need to kill animals, they'll die of it within 2 weeks of exposure. Acute toxicity tells you nothing about whether you're going to get cancer or birth defects or endocrine disruption or damage to the immune system or to the metabolic system. So the fact is, out of the thousands of chemicals that we have around the world and the 7,200 registered in Australia, not one has been tested for any long-term health effect on the planet. There's no testing for children's health, birth defects, cancer, developmental neurotoxicity, which I'll talk about, and other issues. So it's an absolute lie to say that the pesticide residues in our food have been tested, because they have not, for any of the major diseases that we get. In fact, there is only one published study, actually now, sorry, I should say, this is the second one that's just come out just recently now, so we had 2 published studies. This is the first, and for a long time, the only published study on looking at what is the lifetime effect of small amounts of a formulated pesticide at the levels that we get in our diet, the levels that are supposed to be safe. Because most people get their pesticide exposure from food. Most people aren't farmers. So all the residues, and there's hundreds of residues, pesticide residues, come from food. And so what this looked at was this minute amount of Roundup, what happened over the lifetime of an animal. And what they found were numerous mammary and liver and other tumours, and a lot of liver and kidney damage. Now that study caused an outcry, and Monsanto went and got it retracted, but it's since been republished, and it stands as one of the really important studies showing that, we have no evidence of safety of any of these pesticides in our diet, because and the little bit of testing we've got shows actually there are serious health problems from these small amounts of pesticides. The other one is that, when pesticides are approved, they don't just approve one insecticide for the crop. They'll approve a few insecticides, herbicides, fungicides. I'm using the word, when I use the word pesticide, that is the generic for all the sides, herbicides that kill weeds, fungicides that kill fungus, insecticides that kill insects. Side means to kill. So multiple are approved, and they're approved with the expectation that all of them are used during the normal cropping cycle. So as a result, when food is tested, most food has multiple chemical residues, not just one. But we eat more than one food. So what we're eating and getting when we eat conventional food are these cocktails of pesticides plus all the other environmental chemicals that we're exposed to. And so when we test people's blood or urine, there are multiple chemicals in virtually all of us, or be all of us. I think, the regulators, even though they approve all these chemicals, that there is zero requirement of testing for any combination or cocktail. There's nothing. Apart from in what we call the independent scientific literature. And where we do have these peer-reviewed studies, we show that these chemicals are additive and synergistic. And what synergistic means, instead of 1 and 1 equaling 2, it equals 3, 4, 5. 1 and 1 can equal 1,000 in its toxic effect. because of synergism, the way these small amounts. And, you know, things like up to 232 chemicals are being found in the placental cord blood of newborns. Now that to me is a crime of the biggest scale, that our children are being born pre-polluted with no evidence of the safety, but we have very good evidence of the dangers. So, you know, can I say, once again, you've got the regulatory authorities using data-free assumptions of safety, that there is no synergistic or additive effect of all these chemicals. The science clearly shows there are major problems. Of course, the other one you hear all the time is, oh, the levels are too small to cause harm. You know, they're being tested and they're below a certain level, so therefore they are perfectly okay. You'd have to eat a truckload of vegetables to get enough to kill you. What we know now is that many chemicals can become more toxic at the lower dose. They start to act as hormones. So at parts per million, they basically, the hormone receptors in animal and human cells, plant cells, don't tend to receive the chemical. But when you start going down to parts per billion and parts per trillion, our hormone receptors can pick them up, and then they act as hormone disruptors, endocrine disruptors. And when I talk about a part per trillion, which we know that many of these chemicals work at, and we know that when they cross the placenta and affect the developing embryo, a part per trillion can make a significant difference to the normal development of an embryo. What is a part per trillion? If we have 3 Olympic-sized swimming pools of water, put 1 drop in it. 1 drop, that is a part per trillion. So you talk about too small, actually there is no safe level, is a better way to put it. And I just want to explain how critical this is because what we understand now is that as an embryo is developing, as you know, the fetus is developing, at various times there are hormones that are produced that tell the cells, tell the genome, the genes, now is the time to make eyes or arms or our reproductive system or build our brain. And these are called programming events. And they're critical windows. Now, if in that window we get a chemical that acts like a hormone and disrupts that, sends the wrong signal, that fetus now develops with problems for the rest of their life. You can't unprogram these things. And this is a major issue that we need to, you know, deal with. Because, you know, what I'd like to say at the moment, the setting of this ADI is bullshit. Because not one of them have they gone and tested those ADIs at the level that causes endocrine disruption. Now, we've known this since the 1990s. Every regulatory authority around the world has been charged with looking at endocrine disruption, and at this stage, not one has done anything. They put it in a too hard basket because they know what it means. It means we're going to have to farm without chemicals, and if we do that, we're going to starve, of course, aren't we? I think what is really important too that we know now is that many of these act as synthetic reproductive hormones like estrogen. And we know, and we have the science showing how they are major contributors to the epidemic of cancers of the reproductive systems, or our, cancers of our sexual tissue. So we look at breast, ovarian, cervical, endometrial, which is just taking off like you wouldn't believe, one of the big silent epidemics that we have. And then, of course, prostate and testicular cancer. These are the ones where we have the highest number of people per 100,000 with cancers. And we have the science. The science is clear of what these endocrine disruptors, how they're causing it. You know, a very good study just came out not long ago showing how glyphosate, the active ingredient in Roundup, it's an endocrine disruptor, and how it now causes breast cancer. Not just non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which is the court cases are about, and this study shows how it works in conjunction, that's this idea of synergism with other chemicals and how it sets off breast cancer. We're getting more and more studies like this. And I can tell you virtually all of us in this room will have glyphosate in our system. Even if we try to avoid it. It is the new DDT. It's in all our water, it's in our rain. If the neighbour or the council sprays it, believe me, we've got it in our bodies. There's hardly anyone in the world you can test and not find glyphosate in their urine. But we know that so many of the reproductive problems are also caused by these small amounts of chemicals, and we're talking parts per billion, parts per trillion, way below the so-called safe levels. The other one that we hear all the time, oh, the new chemicals aren't like the bad ones like DDT that Rachel Carson talked about. They don't persist in the environment, they break down rapidly. Well, if they don't persist, why do we need maximum residue levels? Why do we need ADIs, average, acceptable daily intakes? Because they persist. But people say, oh, look, they break down very quickly. Yes, they do. But what they forget to tell you is that when they break down, they don't break down to nothing. They break down to metabolites. And guess what? Most of these metabolites are actually more toxic, up to 100 times more toxic than the initial pesticide. Organophosphates are classics like that. How many times you hear of the poor farmer who's got out the old can of diazinon to drench the animals and put in the normal rate and lost half the cows because the diazinon, as it's got old and started to break down, now has become 30 times more toxic. But that's what happens in our food. You've got these small amounts of residues. As these chemicals break down in our food, they are worse. So let's talk about our regulatory authorities, the ones that say, look, our APBMA, for instance, who are doing everything possible to make sure that if we use these chemicals by the label, it's safe, there's nothing to worry about. Trust us, we know what we're doing. We're scientists, you guys are just nothings, We know everything. Well, let's talk about how it works. Firstly, they ignore all the gold standard in science. That's called published peer-reviewed papers in journals. And these are done by independent scientists. They only take the studies submitted by the manufacturers. No conflict of interest there, of course. But the other thing is these studies are actually commercial in confidence. So we're not allowed to see them, only the regulator. And if we want to say, well, look, you've decided this chemical, X amount in our food is safe, and you base it on science, we'd actually like to see those studies that show it's safe and how you came to that conclusion. But they won't. You can't get them. Where we do get them, where they get leaked to us, or a few times through court cases and stuff where they've actually had to release the documents, we find that most of these studies actually show more evidence of harm. They've just glossed it over and pretended that they're safe. Or they're really poor studies. They've never passed muster to be published in the peer-reviewed journals. So what the word actually, the other big problem here and is we have these committees that make the decisions, and so many people who get income from the pesticide industry, from the poison cartels, sit on those committees. So we have this system where the only science that's looked at is made by the pesticide companies, and then you've got the same people from the pesticide companies making decision over the studies they've done. That is corruption. It's actually called regulatory capture, where the regulators are captured by industry. You know, the banking inquiry was a really good one when we looked at our great, financial regulators and how, they were totally captured by the finance industry. And we see it time and time again. You know, the two Boeing airplanes that crashed, that's because the American regulator, the FAA, was captured by Boeing. You know, this corruption of industry basically captures their regulator to do their business, and that's the case with every pesticide regulator on the planet. They're corrupt. So what I really want to talk about, and I think is really important, is our children. Glenn talked about it. Our children are our future. We're here to give them a better world, or at least we hope we are. So what sort of society poisons its children? And I think one of the things I want to get across, that there is zero requirement for any testing to do with children. When you look at the testing methodologies, the ones that the OECD puts out in requirements, you start with adolescent animals. You don't look at the fetus or young developing children or going through puberty, which are really critical times in development. And we know that this is when we are most vulnerable. Start looking at the independent science. Look at the literature, and we can show that these small amounts of pesticides are causing lower IQs, attention deficit hyperactive disorder, autism spectrum, which is going through the roof, a whole range of organ damage, autoimmune diseases, lack of physical coordination. Oh, gee, should have turned it off. It's always the case. I meant to. I can't tell you. I can't tell you how many times I get up and you're doing a keynote, and that's when you get the phone call, without fail. If I don't turn off the phone, I've got a call. But loss of temper, anger management issues, which is a big, when we talk about domestic violence and all these other issues at the moment, violence against women, we actually know that part of it is caused by this. Bipolar, the whole schizophrenia spectrum, depression, childhood suicide, which is an epidemic, and childhood obesity, we know is more than just junk food. We're understanding how these hormone disruptors are actually disrupting the normal metabolism of children. So they're not actually burning the sugars. They're actually, as soon as they eat, it gets put on as fat. And they're constantly hungry because their body's not getting the sugar, and it's just building up as fat because the actual metabolic system has changed. So I just look at autism. This is peer-reviewed. I just realised I've got to look at this one. This is peer-reviewed work, a peer-reviewed paper that I was one of the authors of, and we looked at a whole range of diseases in the United States that had increased exponentially. And what we did is track that against the increase in glyphosate, Roundup in the United States. This, that increase, you see the red line is glyphosate. You see it goes from nothing and just goes straight up. That's the introduction of GMO crops, Roundup Ready crops. And that led to a massive spike in glyphosate. And then you'll see the official figures for the growth in autism. It's just skyrocketing. It's an epidemic in the Western world now, autism. And so we track them, and a lot of people say, well, look, yeah, correlations, correlation isn't proof. It isn't proof of causation, because mobile phone sales in Finland could be the cause of that. Or Monsanto's response for that was to actually try and show that the growth in organic food sales had a similar correlation, so that was the cause of autism. Their way of trying to discredit our paper. But what we did there is to have a look at, is this linked? There is a very standard tool that is used. It's called a Pearson's correlation coefficient. And that's what statisticians look at to see, what is the probability that they're linked? Well, in this case, the probability that these are an accident and they're not linked is 1 in 10,000. Like I said, they couldn't criticize us on our data. We brought in a statistician. We checked and double checked. That is bulletproof. So all they could do is say, correlation is not causation. Can I say, if that was a drug and you had that level of causation, it would be taken off the market. Give you an example, Zantac is being taken off the market in the last few weeks because Zantac is a stomach medication, because it's got a small amount of what's called NDMA, which is a class 2A carcinogen, which is the same level as glyphosate. And because it's a medication, it gets taken off the market because it's got a small amount of it. By the way, these nitrosamines are also used to cure a lot of meats. When you use nitrates to cure meats, and that's what they form. That's why they're also regarded as carcinogens, because it's a food, you don't take it off. And similarly, because this is a pesticide, you don't take it off. But let's have a look at, causation now. Because, not long after we publish it and ridiculed, saying, it's probably organic food's the cause because it's also increasing in sales. A study comes out showing the development of nerves and what happens when you add small amounts of glyphosate to this nerve development. So what you see is you've got the control, and there you can see the long line coming out. It's called an axon. And if you have a look at the one next to it where you've got the small amount of glyphosate, there is no axon. And if you have a look as you go through it, you'll see that the nerve cells, as they develop, that have small amounts of glyphosate, they never develop properly. They are underdeveloped compared to the control with no glyphosate. Now, the brain is our biggest collection of nerve cells. We know glyphosate crosses the placenta. And while the child is growing and developing the brain, it's getting small amounts of glyphosate, meaning that segments of the brain now are not developing properly. And that is why we know that glyphosate is a contributor to the autism spectrum. I'd also like to say there are other neurotoxins that we know also do it, such as mercury, such as fluoride in our water. All of these, lead, there's a whole range of neurotoxins. And we also start to understand that these things are synergistic. So, you look at the combination of glyphosate and mercury, we're starting to really damage the normal development of children's brains. Talk about cancer. One of the most important documents that ever came out in 2010 to be ignored, like all important documents are, is the United States President's Cancer Panel report done under President Obama. Had 32 of the world's best oncologists, experts on cancer, write this. And what they showed is 80% of cancers come from environmental, not, look, it's a genetic lottery, you got bad luck. No, it's environmental causes, which means that if we remove these causes, we can prevent 80% of cancers tomorrow and use the funding to work on the other 20%. And actually, we know how the other 20% we know how that all happened. Actually, it's now it's through mitochondrial damage. We're starting to understand the pathways very well, and where we're getting cancer. And we also know too that even when we talk about the genetics and the genes, it's the epigenome, which is an area that surrounds a layer of methylated and histone organic molecules that surround the genes, the chromosome. And that works like the best way to say is like the master switches and dimmer switches. It tells genes, it turns them on or off, or it tells them to express the proteins at high or low levels. And we know that is exquisitely sensitive to the environment. And we know now that small amounts of pesticides make what are called these epi-mutations along it and actually affect then how genes are expressed. So if you've potentially got what's called an oncogene, a gene that might cause cancer, healthy lifestyle, that gene shouldn't make a difference. But you damage the epigenome and turn that gene up, now that's going to express proteins that can cause cancer. So we're really understanding how pesticides are the pathway, how these small amounts are causing this epidemic in cancer. And cancers are continuously increasing, going up. This is the World Health Organization. We're seeing, the data increasing. We want to look at things like adult cancers. They're just continuously going up. Breast cancer, by the way, is just still, the rates are increasing. Yes, we're getting better survival rates in the Western world because we've got the resources. But in the developing world, the mortality rates for women are just skyrocketing. This is an incredibly cruel disaster that we're putting on people, and yet it's preventable. Let's look at thyroid cancer. I picked that because that's actually one of the ones that was that the World Health Organization looked at. This is our paper again, and you can see the green line was the trend line up until the 1990s when Roundup was introduced. The red line is the increase in glyphosate, Roundup. The blue line, the increase in GMO crops, because most of that Roundup increase is due to the advent of Roundup-ready GMOs. And you can see that thyroid cancer is just skyrocketing. Once again, when we did our Pearson's correlation coefficient, the odds of them not being linked was 1 in 10,000. Same again. bladder cancer. And then the year after we published that, the International Agency for Research into Cancer, the World Health Organization's cancer body, published a monograph, and it's really worth reading, on saying that glyphosate, they gave it class 2A as a carcinogen. Now, to explain it, class 1 is where we have a lot of evidence in humans that something causes cancer, like smoking, okay, and alcohol, asbestos. There's a whole range of them. What class 2A means is that the animal studies show unequivocally that this is a carcinogen in animals, limited evidence in humans. So, in this case, the main evidence was non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and that's why there's a court cases. Now we're starting to find more evidence, like the study that came out showing conclusively that it causes breast cancer in human breasts, not just animals, not mammary cancers. The other one I want to go on show about is what we call what we actually call developmental neurotoxicity. This is where small amounts of a chemical actually damage the developing brain, like I showed you with Roundup. Now, we know that organophosphates do this. This is an example here of field work done of two communities in Sonora in Mexico. One community is a farming community and the children are exposed to pesticides. The other one lives up in the mountains and they don't have any pesticide exposure. And these are little 4-year-old girls. And so you can see the one on the left, actually my left, you can see that those girls they draw pictures of people just like we'd expect little girls to do. The other one, they cannot do anything closely resembling a person. That's brain damage. Because that gets ignored, that's called, oh no, that's just anecdotal, that's not real science. Well, a lot of real science has come out. And I suppose what I want to show here is that the science now clearly shows the damage. The bottom line here was we found significant abnormalities in morphological measures, blah, blah, blah. If I translate that into plain English, we found brain damage. And this is the picture here that by doing MRIs of the children, and they could actually see the areas of the brain that were damaged. In this case, Mum ate the normal American diet. Those pesticides, it wasn't because Mum was working out in the field. She ate good fresh fruit and vegetables to make her children healthy. The more fresh fruit and vegetables she ate, the more pesticides and the more damage done to the children. And so, I want to basically show this because, what sort of society poisons and damages its children? This is criminal. This is out there in the public domain, and yet, in Australia, for instance, we haven't banned that chemical or those chemicals, but we should be. We know the damage it's doing. And so what I always tell people, look, don't wait for the regulators. They're not going to do it. We have one really good way of looking after our children. Eat organic. And we have many studies now showing within days of changing to an organic diet, the urinary levels of pesticides drop down to where they can hardly be measured. We can turn it around so quickly with an organic diet. And we need to give this message out. How important what we are doing, that we need to have everybody, every child eating organic food. I particularly want women who are about to conceive and men to know that if you're going to have a baby, start eating organic now, because we actually know that babies are being born pre-polluted. We know pesticides are already in the seminal fluids and fallopian tube fluids. Before they even conceived, they're being poisoned, let alone what crosses the placenta or what they get from breast milk and then from food. So eating organic, to me, is the best value. You know, conventional, people say, oh, organic's too expensive. Well, how fucking, I shouldn't swear, but I'd get really angry. How expensive is this? There is no cost in the world that can pay for that. That is just so expensive. You know, organic is the best value. And, you want your children to have a best future. This is the best investment you can make. It's cheap. It's just the best value. And we need to really get that across. And I'm probably running out of time, but I just wanted to say the other part of it is, we don't need pesticides, and we can get good yields without them. And I haven't got a lot of time to go into it, but I just want to follow on to what Glenn said. The very basis of not using pesticides are soil health. It goes right back to our early days, Sir Albert Howard, the health of the soil, plants, man, are one and indivisible. And then Rodale put healthy soil, healthy plants, healthy people. And we know that. And I just want to show you this, for example. This is a beautiful example of work done in Ethiopia by one of our iPhone members. And here, you've got one side where the field is composted. We're putting in humus, organic matter. And the other side that's grown chemically. And the wheat grown with chemical fertilizers had to be sprayed with fungicides for rust. The organic didn't. The chemical wheat, if it wasn't sprayed, they wouldn't have got any crop. They got 1.6 tons a hectare. You see the organic got 6.5 tons per hectare there. And can I say it's the same soil, they're right next to each other, the same spore pressure, everything else, but these healthy plants can resist disease. Same with pests. I used to grow papayas commercially. I grow as part of tropical fruits. And a lot of tropical fruits would get fruit spotting bugs. And for years in Australia, all the farmers said we have to keep endosulfan, one of the last organochlorines, because all the other pesticides don't work, and if we don't have this, we'll never be able to grow the crops. And so we're the second last country in the world to ban endosulfan as a result of it. But what I want to show you here, if you have a look at the bottom of the papaya, you can see all the damage. That's damage from the fruit spotting bug. Now, what I did to get rid of it was fix up the soil health. And as soon as you do that, you can actually go and pick them off with your hands. The plants put out phenolic compounds, which basically make the insects sick, and then the predators can come in and get them off. And so that's the other thing I just want to talk about, is bringing in our friends to do the work, to control these pests. And this is where we start bringing in agroecology, or functional biodiversity. This word of biodiversity is just critical in our systems. And we know that if we put flowers in the system, we will bring in the natural enemies, the beneficial insects, because many of them, part of their life cycle, they need nectar and pollen. Many of them, if you see the pictures here, the adults, particularly the parasitoids, the little wasps, they lay their eggs in or just on the edge of caterpillars. And it's a bit like Alien. It's actually where Alien came from. It's from the concept of parasitoid wasp. Lays its egg inside the host, and then the larvae eats it out and then emerges. And, but what happens with a lot of them, after they've emerged, they see the error of their way and they become vegans, and they need to have nectar and pollen. Not all of them, but the real reason for nectar and pollen for many of them is they actually need it to become sexually mature. So the new generation emerges, but unless it has nectar and pollen, they can't reproduce. So how long have I got? Am I out of time? Okay. Sorry? Am I? Okay, sorry. I'll just end on here. What I've done on my own farm is just put a carpet of biodiversity underneath it to bring in all the beneficials. So that I like it. My neighbours think I'm really messy because I don't have nice little brown circles around it. And I actually like the idea of having all these flowers, but it brings in multiple ecosystem services because as well as many of them fix my nitrogen, so I don't need any nitrogen. I'm just going to go to one last picture. And this is one of my crops, rambutans. Now I took that because I just wanted to explains everything what we're doing. I'm using solar energy here to power functional biodiversity to give me ecosystem services, and I'm getting multiple. These are legumes. They give me all my nitrogen for free. They are fixing carbon and increasing the soil carbon. I can use them as stock feed for cattle. The flowers give me my pest control, and the other one we call them is living mulch. They actually cover the soil. I live in the tropics, and you want to talk about that 24 degrees for building humus. It can be, 33 degrees. I put the thermometer under this living mulch, and it's in the low 20s, and that's that makes sure I've got soil life. But and look, I just want to end here and say that in my time I was a very successful farmer. I used to export crops all around the world, including these ones, rambutans, to Japan. And Japan are the fussiest people. The Japanese are the fussiest people in the world, and your quality control has to be just superb. I could get the quality and the quantity and made a lot of money exporting to Japan with this system. And I just want to end, because I know I'm out of time, but with bringing the right systems, we don't need pesticides, and we can actually get really good, productive, high-yielding systems, better than conventionals, by looking at how we use functional biodiversity. And I think that's really the choice, between these systems and the other one, which is where we're poisoning our children, destroying our future generation. So thank you.